and welcome to the holiday track here at ConTinual. I'm your host, Gail Martin, and tonight we are talking about cookies. But before we dive into that and sink our teeth into those cookies, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Dawn.
Hi, my name's Dawn Deal, and I write under DS Deal, and can't wait to talk about baking with you guys.
Jeanne Marie.
Hi, I'm Jeanne Marie Ward. I write fiction, nonfiction, and everything in between. And every year I bake a heck of a lot of cookies.
Okay, Dee. You're muted.
Oh, can you
There
hear
we go.
me?
Yeah, we can now.
My name's Dee Norman. I write nonfiction under the name Dee Norman, and I write fiction under the name of D.L. Solito.
Okay.
And Jessica.
I'm Jessica Nettles. I write historical fantasy and Southern horror, and I bake a heck of a lot of cookies too.
I'm Gail Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. My personal cookie baking is limited to those rolls of cookies you slice and put on the cheater cookies. But my husband and my daughters bake a slew of things, and I get to be the recipient of their largesse. So I am a cookie eating expert, but not necessarily a baking expert. So let's start with, what's your favorite cookie to bake and why? Dawn?
My favorite cookie to bake is actually not entirely a cookie. It's more of a candy. So it goes really quickly. And they just were handed down in one, you know, you get those school cookbooks where everybody contributes to it. So it was one of those, one of my first teaching jobs. And they're basically peanut butter corn flakes and corn syrup, but you make them into balls, like roll them real tight into balls so you don't just drop them. And they are decadent. So it's my favorite.
Okay. Jeanne Marie.
Well, I don't know that I have a favorite cookie to bake simply because work, no like. But in terms of something I like to eat myself, and in terms of what everybody else seems to like best, it's a variation of the molasses cookies on the grandma molasses jar. And basically you do the whole thing, but you roll them before you bake them in Betty Crocker sprinkles that are either gold or silver. And it has to be the Betty Crocker kind because the Wilton stuff doesn't work. But these are little square sprinkles of hard sugar. And it gives the cookies a snap and it makes them glitter.
Cool. That's very cool.
Dee?
I think my favorite cookie to bake is one of my family's recipes. We have a rosette anisette cookie, and I like it because it's fidgety and fiddly. I don't do a lot of baking except at the holidays and usually with my mother and other family members. And so this is a recipe where once the dough is created, and you have to roll it into like little small strips, loop it, and then actually cut it into little rosettes before you bake it. And so I just like that fiddly part of it. It satisfies my tactile nature.
Okay. How about you, Jessica?
I really like baking shortbread, and I like experimenting with flavors with it because shortbread is basically vanilla, right? But I like doing things like adding tea to it. And it's fun because you can roll it out. I like the tactile thing too. And I like to roll it out and like use cookie cutters to kind of make it cute. So last year I made some jasmine tea. Was it jasmine or was it was Earl Grey? I take that back. It was Earl Grey, and I cut them out in little cat figures. And it was so cute and it's so tasty. And nearly everybody loves shortbread. So, you know, you offer them shortbread, they're going to take it.
Not counting those, you know, cut them off the roll cookies, I do love no bakes. I know it's not much of a stretch, but at least you mix the ingredients. And I think it's the chocolate, the peanut butter, the oatmeal. They just are, they have a good mouth feel, and the chocolate peanut butter thing, you know, So I really love those. And they were always the ones that I would, pick off the cookie tray when it would go around at the holidays. Which brings me to the next question. Are there cookies that you have a particular nostalgic connection to? And what stories do you have? Dawn?
So probably the one I have the most nostalgic is one that my children really love. And they're kind of messy and a bit of a pain to make. They are actually a Martha Stewart cookie. They're a riff on a snickerdoodle with cocoa in it. So it's cocoa and butter and sugar and all those things, but you have to chill the dough and then roll them in sugar before you bake them. And they're just messy. There's no other way to get around it. It gets all over your hands. And I have 4 children. So when you have 4 children, ranging, there's a 10-year age difference between my oldest and youngest. So the kitchen would be messy, but it would also be really fun at the same time to have them all together, have them not fighting for once. But these cookies were a must-have. My youngest son was absolutely convinced Santa was not going to leave presents unless Grammy's chocolate cookies are out there. So that's probably my nostalgic one. And they're coming home finally because they're all grown up. So when they come home, we may have to roll out a batch or 2 just to make sure Santa comes this year.
Okay, sounds logical to me. Jean Marie?
Well, before I start on that, because there is a definite cookie that, is something that says Christmas and it's not here anymore. But Jessica, have you tried adding chopped rosemary to those shortbreads? Because that's one of the ones I use. It's from a hotel. They're called Rosemary Carlson shortbreads, and it's from the Carlson Resort Hotel.
I have not tried that, but we have fresh rosemary outside, and I have been tempted, and I've also been tempted to add a little bit of lemon to it too, because we already make a cupcake that's like that, and it's absolutely to die for. So now you got me thinking.
One of my neighbors basically whinges until I give her extra when I bring around the plates of the cookies. But what said cookie in our family was pizzellis. And, it's an Italian cookie. And basically, I know I don't look it, but I am mostly Italian. And they are to make. Because you have to get either a pizzelli iron where you do this with it like a giant bellows, only it's iron and you're flattening it out, or you use a variation on a waffle iron and have to pull them out. But a properly made pizzelli is like half or a quarter of the thickness that you find in the commercial pizzellis. And the flavor of anise, which is one of the things that flavors it, is so much more like a perfume. It's not overpowering, but it's very definitely there. And those were at every celebration, especially Christmas, because I had an aunt who made these sort of on an industrial scale. And it broke my heart when she died, because nobody in the next generation or the generation after that was going to go crazy doing the things she did to make pizzellis, which she would hand off in shoe boxes. I'm not making that up. But then about 14, 15 years ago, we visited his relatives, my husband's relatives in Florida. My husband's Slovak, okay? And basically, we got there and the family all gathered at this one cousin's house, and his wife was Italian. And I walked in the door, and the first thing I smelled was batter and anise. And I went, yes, his cousin Peter's wife, Angela, makes pizzellis just like my Aunt Nellie. And so it's like, oh my God, it's back. It's back.
Awesome. Dee.
Well, my family being Italian American, we made pizzellis, but never at Christmas time. Too fidgety for Christmas time because we were busy churning out about 4 or 5 other traditional Italian cookies. But the one that it really just would not be Christmas without is my mom's homemade biscotti recipe. That is a twice baked cookie and is just has the most beautiful texture and is just to die for. And I know a lot of times when you get biscotti out commercially, it's really, really super hard. But when it's just fresh out of the oven and it's still soft and you're going to dip it in your tea and your coffee or your wine anyway, that is all Christmas to me. That beautiful, soft biscotti before it hardens up.
Now I'm hungry. Jessica?
So at our house, my mother makes, and I make lots of different cookies, but what really screams Christmas for me is my mother's ribbon cookies. And I don't know if you've ever seen this before or not, but a ribbon cookie is basically a 3-layer cookie. It's got a chocolate layer, it's got a layer that is vanilla and poppy seed, and it has a layer that's vanilla and candied cherries that are cut up into the dough. It is fidgety, it is a pain in the ass to make. And my mother will make it every year. She has not made it this year because we cannot find the candied cherries. And I am grieving over this because all of us are like, you're going to make the ribbon cookies, right? And then she sends some home with the children, and the grandchildren. But what you do is you take the separated doughs, and then you press it into a pan and you refrigerate it. And once it gets hard, you pull it back out, take it out of the pan and cut it into your cookies and then bake it. And it is, it's so good with tea. So good with tea. She also makes a chocolate cherry cookie. Once again, the candied cherries again. That she will bag for my children specifically because that is their favorite cookie. Beyond anything I can make, that is their cookie. And a lot of the nostalgia comes from the fact that my children grew up living in the same house with their grandparents. I was a single mom, and we didn't have the money to live by ourselves. And my parents essentially allowed me to live with them while I raised them. So they were exposed to a lot of just amazing traditions and amazing cookie stuff going on. So they got spoiled with lots and lots of cookies, and especially at Christmas time. So lots of good memories with that. And the Pizzelli thing, I'm not Italian, but oh my God, I got exposed as a teenager. I had a friend who served in Italy with her husband. They were a military family, and she learned how to make them. And so I met them through their teenage sons. I did not date them. But she made Pizzellis, and I was exposed to this beautiful cookie, and they are still my favorite. And if I had a Pizzelli iron, I would make the hell out of them because they are just the best.
My music teacher when I was a kid was Italian American. I grew up in a town that was very heavily Italian, and she would make the Pizzellis, however you say them, for our recitals. That was always one of the things that she would make as something very fancy when we would do our recitals. And so I have always, every time I see them, I think of my music teacher, because that was something very special. And it was not something I grew up around, so it was very unusual for me. My mom and my grandmother didn't bake, but Larry's side of the family, my husband's side, he had aunts who baked, and one aunt in particular would start weeks ahead of time and freeze the cookies in advance, and she would come to Christmas dinner at my mother-in-law's house, and her contribution, everybody brought a side dish, my mother-in-law did the main ham, was this huge tray of all kinds of cookies, the Russian tea cookies and the ones with the chocolate thing on the top, the Hershey's Kiss on the top, and the pizzelles and all kinds of things. And so just navigating through this bounty of cookies was one of the most decadent things at Christmas, because all those choices, and they were all wonderful. So yeah, for someone who doesn't bake themselves, that was special. Jeannie, welcome. And we're catching up on who are you and what's your favorite cookie And along with that, what cookie makes you nostalgic? That'll catch you up with everybody.
Okay, I'm Jeanne Adams. I write urban fantasy and paranormal romantic suspense, and I love cookies of all kinds. My favorite are still probably just good old Toll House cookies and chocolate chip, but the ones that make me nostalgic are pinwheel cookies. Have y'all ever seen those?
Oh, I've made them. They're
Yeah.
lovely.
I've made them too. They're lovely. But my mom used to make them, but only at the holidays. And that was her sort of one she kept for the holidays. And she would make like 2 or 3 different kinds. She'd make a regular sugar cookie dough and put peppermint in it, and then a chocolate, and then roll them and then cut them to the pinwheels. And so the peppermint ones were always awesome. And just generally the black and white ones were great. So we loved those. Every time I see them, I'm like, oh, Christmas.
I'll add another nostalgic cookie. My grandmother used to make, my dad's mother, different grandmother, would make these very thin, not quite as thin as the Moravian cookies, but around that size and shape, but not with the spice angle. And all of the cousins always swore that they were really crispy until you dunked them, and then they got even more crispy when you dunked them in the milk instead of getting softer. And unfortunately, her cookbook was lost. So we weren't able to get her recipes when she passed away.
Oh, no.
But I think it might be a brown butter sugar cookie, but I'm not sure. It would have been, Pennsylvania Dutch recipe, very basic, Depression generation, well, actually World War I generation. So probably very basic ingredients, but that makes me nostalgic to think about it. And I hope I can find it again or recreate it, because like I said, we lost her cookbook, or her cookbook was lost. What's the most complicated cookie you've ever attempted, and how did it go? Dawn?
The most complicated cookie. That's a really good question. It actually was an orange cookie. Believe it or not, it was sort of an orange shortbread, and lots of grating of oranges and having to get it just so. I think actually I have to take it back. I wasn't sure, but it was a sugar cookie, and sugar cookies and I do not have a good relationship. I've yet to find the recipe that works sort of foolproof where you can get them just perfect. And I must have fought with this cookie over and over, because you made like an orange sugar to glaze it with, and you had to have an orange icing. And I finally just ended up with like orange sliced cookie, just rolled them and sliced them and just gave up, because it was never ever going to be the way it looked in the cookbook. And so yes, if I can tease out the ingredients and it's going to be a sugar cookie, I just skip it, because it's just not going to work for me. So
Dawn versus the sugar cookie.
it is, yes.
Jean Marie.
Well, there are several, and fortunately, the exact enormities are lost in the midst of time. But the first year I was making multiple cookies to give out platters of, I found a recipe for what was called a self-frosting cookie. And what it was a variation on a meringue that you basically would dollop on your cookie sheet and then let sit for 12 hours while it bloomed on top, and then you baked it. And it wasn't that complicated, but it was the time involved, and you had to keep them on the cookie sheet for 12 hours. And that just, I decided they were tasty enough, but not so tasty that people were asking for them the way they did for the shortbread Carlson or the molasses cookies. The other one was, it was supposed to be a bar cookie with candied oranges in them, little orange candies in them. Unfortunately, it was in a Slovak cookbook, one of the Slovak church cookbooks. And I don't know about other church ladies, but I happen to know from experience dealing with Greg's family, and not the ones in Florida, but the ones in New Jersey, that little old Slovak ladies routinely skip important elements of the recipe so that nobody can make it as good as them. And that cookie just didn't, I mean, I wasted a lot of ingredients and a lot of time in trashing it. But in terms of actual difficulty, in terms of what really is difficult in getting it right, I don't know how many of you remember, but there was a style of cookie that you loaded into what looked like a very large bore gun.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Made them.
And yeah, and squeezed the dough out into floral shapes. Or when you were talking ribbon cookies, Jessica, that's what I thought you were talking about. You know,
No.
they basically came out piped
Mhm.
yeah. And oh my God, how did people do that? I mean, I can understand how they would do it with the pizzellis. I just don't want to be bothered. But that one, I never had the physical strength. The dough never really had the right consistency. It was like, this is alchemy. I can't do it.
Okay. Jeannie.
Oh gosh, the most difficult ones, most of those had something to do with ingredients rather than either sourcing ingredients. There was a cookie I tried to make from a Bon Appetit magazine, and you were supposed to use anise and I forget what you're supposed to do with it now, because it's been several decades since I did this, but you're supposed to do something with it specifically, and I could never get it to do right. And then any difficult cookie I ever tried came from Bon Appetit magazine. Because they had these super complicated recipes. And I'd try them and I'd be like, well, that was a failure. And like Jean Marie said, you know, you'd waste these expensive ingredients and be like, well, never doing that again because I can't afford to get it right. But the anise ones, I think you had to like soak it in a liquor and then you were supposed to do something with it. And that's when I discovered that I really don't like anise flavoring. It was like, yeah. Okay, so either I didn't make the recipe right, or I really don't like this. It's awful. One of the most complicated I ever made was also a Bon Appetit magazine, and it was a variation on Hamantaschen with the poppy seeds and everything. Super tasty, but it was a very complicated, and Hamantaschen can be very easy, but this one was not. I just remember hours of going, did I do this right? Tastes good. All right. Okay.
What about you, Dee?
No, it was about 6 years ago, and I thought I would go a little bit outside of my comfort zone with my daughter and make some gingerbread cookies and cut them out of gingerbread men and decorate them like gingerbread men. And I thought, what a great fun thing to do with kid. And though complex baking doesn't trip me up, apparently, complex decorating is not my forte. And these turned into the ugliest, most horrifying gingerbread cookies. My mother, who would never say a harsh word to anyone about their cooking and is always encouraging to be picked the first one up, and looked at it and went, ugh. I was like, oh, ouch. So my daughter and I have not made gingerbread cookies since because we could not cope with the decorating piece.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm not the only one who looks at all these elaborately frosted things and goes, I can make a flourless chocolate cake with my eyes closed. Why can't I decorate a gingerbread man?
I can't even ice a straight up cake just with Duncan Hines icing. I'm real bad at that, so I don't know why.
I can do the cakes. I can do but when it comes to doing it on the cookie and getting the consistency right, and it's like, oh no, forget this. Just forget this.
All right. Jessica?
Jumping onto the decorating thing, my first foray into decorating gingerbread men turned into a bloodbath. Or at least it looked that way. My goal, and this was about the same time you were decorating gingerbread men and had your fiasco. I cut them out, they were beautiful. And I'm like, my goal was this: I am going to make a bunch of gingerbread men who wore Star Trek red shirts. I was going to decorate them. I was going to put them in a Star Trek uniform. They were going to be gorgeous. I had learned a little bit about royal icing and how to make it. I'd been watching the Great British Bake Off. I knew what I was doing. Mary Berry was my guide. Made my royal icing. It was gorgeous. It was red. It was the perfect red. Put it in my piping, my little piping thing. Started piping, came out faster than it turned into CSI Gingerbread Man. I have photographs. It pops up on my Christmas memories every year. Dead gingerbread men, blood everywhere. Oh, so embarrassing. So this year I took a class with decorating, and I have the tubes there, and I'm like, oh, that's the consistency it's supposed to be. That's right.
I always left my gingerbread men undecorated because I never could get it right. And we would although I'd sometimes use the little silver beads, do that, but that's like almost like cheating, right? But we tried one time. I have a girlfriend, she has 2 boys who are about the same age as my boys, and they came over and we were going to make gingerbread houses. And I had carefully made all the pieces, and we were going to make gingerbread houses, and we had all the little doolollies to stick on it, and we assembled the houses, and we were supposed to have graham crackers for the roof, right?
Right.
You're supposed to put, the way it was described, you're supposed to put this pretzel across the top, it's the roof tree, and then you lead up the graham crackers. Well, we opened the graham crackers, and they were bad. They had gone rancid.
Oh.
And one of the boys
No.
said, "These smell like feet." And so every Christmas we go, and so they turned into gingerbread toolboxes instead of houses because they already had the pretzel across the top.
That's
so they looked like little
hilarious.
toolboxes. So we ended up decorating the toolboxes. And every Christmas, somebody inevitably says, "Well, how about those graham crackers? Let's get those out."
There's something about, hey, Paige, we'll be back to you in just a second. There's something about gingerbread, I guess. A dear friend gave us these, when the girls were little, when the kids were little, these gingerbread molds to make a very elaborate house. They're beautiful clay molds. And, if you knew what you were doing and were any good at it, you would probably end up with beautifully detailed gingerbread. Well, we tried making it, rolled it out, got on the mold, but it was the construction piece that, we used the icing, we built the walls, we put it together, we had the roof, we had everything. And in the morning, it looked like Florida after a tornado. It all just fallen apart. Almost as good as when I was a child and somebody gave me one of those Barbie cakes with the skirt as a, cake as a skirt.
Yeah.
Didn't tell my mom to keep it in the fridge. And when the icing softened in the morning, Barbie was naked.
And deshabille.
These are things that you need to know. Paige, welcome. Tell us who you are and your favorite and nostalgic cookies, and maybe the most complicated kind of cookie you ever tried to make, whether or not it worked.
Oh my goodness. I'm Paige Alcursi, and I'm so sorry I'm late. I got an unexpected phone call. And yeah, I was having a good time there. So yeah, I'm a fantasy author and I write feminist Westerns with dragons, but never mind that, now there's cookies to be talked about. So growing up, it was the plain old sugar cookie with the sugar with the food coloring and the icing and all those terrible silver balls that broke your teeth for all the noses for all the creatures. That's my nostalgia cookie. Probably the most complicated cookie is not terribly complicated, but it is my favorite. And it's basically, I grew up in New England and we used to go to Quebec City, and there are chocolate rum balls on every corner, okay, which are not cookies. But I decided at some point that I was going to turn those into cookies, but instead of using rum, I was going to use frangelica, which is the amaretto. And so they're basically like a homemade Nilla wafer with a chocolate overlay soaked in frangelica and covered with like sprinkly, sugary things.
I want to eat that.
And
Okay, so you need to send me some of those, Paige. Like,
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah,
I
the
want to
next
put them in my
con, we're all
belly.
out together. Hello.
yeah, and so they're slightly complicated, but they're so good. And the secret is that you have to use a raw dark chocolate. You can't use a semi-sweet. You have to use really dark chocolate because that's the bitterness of that counteracts the sweetness of the Francelica, and the
Yeah.
balance is delightful. So I like the Ghirardelli dark unsweetened
So
chocolate.
good.
Oh, so good. Yes, they're delightful. And you get the bonus of being slightly drinkies when you eat them.
Always a bonus.
Yeah, it sounds like the rum balls my friend used to make, where it was something with Oreo cookies mashed up with a lot of rum or brandy in a ball. The cookie itself was not the important part. It was that you could get a buzz off these cookies. They were pretty awesome. So how did you get into baking? Did you have a family member who was a mentor? Did you just wake up one morning and go, darn it, I'm going to learn to bake cookies? Or how did you get into all this? Dawn?
My mother and grandmother were both bakers, but they weren't hardcore. I'm still the thing that my grandmother made that my mother makes almost to perfection and that I don't even come close to, that I'm still working on, is this amazing vanilla pound cake that is to die for. And so they were more cake bakers than cookie bakers, but I kind of I like cookies because they're fast, like me and bread don't get along. I don't have time for that, right? So, and cakes I have trouble with because, again, I'm not patient enough, especially pound cake, because you whip it up too high and it collapses and it's a whole other adventure. But cookies are fast. And if I've got a sugar craving, I can get me into the cookies. And I figured out somewhere along the way that I didn't have to follow the recipe. And it actually makes things better. Like the classic chocolate chip cookie recipe that's on the back of the bag, the Nestle bag.
Whole house.
I wanted to make some of those. I didn't have all the ingredients, so I started substituting things. And luckily I wrote it all down as I did it. Best damn cookies I've ever made as far as a chocolate chip cookie goes. No white sugar, only brown sugar. You don't have enough chocolate chips, so you do chocolate chips and butterscotch.
Mm-hmm.
And you use whole wheat flour because you don't have any white flour. And, oh my God, they're so good. The texture is amazing. You underbake them slightly so they're chewy. And oh yeah. So once I figured out that I could experiment and the world wasn't going to end, then I bought a cookie recipe book and I've kind of been cracking them out ever since. So.
Okay. Dawn.
So let me start with, I love my mother, but I learned how to cook in self-defense. She maybe it was the 1970s things, but she hit every single fad of the 1970s as a cook. So we had where we only had Chinese food, or so I just she worked in the city, and I would get home before she did, and I just pulled out the cookbooks and I figured if there was directions, I could do it. And of course, this was long before any videos or YouTubes or Great British Bake Off or any of that. And it was a lot of trial and error, and burn things thrown away outside before she got home. But I think that's how you learn. Like, you just sort of get in there and muck about and try. And so probably about the age of 13, I think, my stepmom actually gave me my first cookbook, which was a cookie book. And I just sort of systematically worked it was a Betty Crocker kind of cookbook. I still have it because there are cookies I still go back to time and time again. And I just sort of systematically worked my way through the things I thought I could handle. And then went from there. So we ate a lot of cookies before I figured out I probably should make dinner too. So that's how I stumbled into cooking as a martial art, I guess, would be the best way to put it.
baking for self-defense.
It really was.
Absolutely self-defense, because, you know, I have talked on other shows about my mother and the imploding turkey. This was the lady who believed that all meat should be frozen before use and then washed with soap and water before being stuck in a broiler pan. Yeah, it wasn't faddish. It was just, she was disastrous. I mean, she literally burnt water more than once. But the way I started baking happened in first grade. I was at Catholic school, and you have to go provide baked goods for a bake sale. Okay. I said, uh-oh. And the nun, I said, you don't want my mother to, no, just don't stop right here. Don't. And of course got smacked by the nun for my trouble. So I came home. Mother got the note and said, oh, wonderful, I can bake. Now my mother, in addition to being the world's worst cook, believed she was a good cook. So she got a mix, and she got a mix of the frosting. And what she put together, even my father, who adored the ground she her size 5 high heels walked upon, was going, oh my God, that looks like the dark side of the moon. I mean, it had peaks, it had valleys, it had crevices, and in it puddled this watery glaze. Okay, so we brought it there, and I got whacked again because you're supposed to have your mother bake this, but she did. Don't lie to me, child. It's a sin. So I kept my mouth shut, suffered through that. The next time the bake sale came up, I just nodded, took the note, and then hid it. Went to my mother and said, they've asked us to bake a cake for a friend's birthday. Can I bake the cake? It's very important. I really like Vicky. And my mother said, well, yeah, but you're going to have me turn on the oven. And I'm going, oh, crap, I'll have to figure out what the temperature is. But I got the boxes, made the cake. It wasn't the world's best cake. It sort of listed a little bit. And the frosting wasn't exactly even, but it covered the whole thing. And it didn't look like the dark side of the moon on a bad day. And so I brought it in, and Sister Mary Josephine looked at me and said, see how much better it is when your mother cooks for you? That's when I got into public relations. Doesn't matter what the truth is, honey. It's only what they think it is.
Which is what makes Obi-Wan Kenobi the patron saint of PR, truth from a certain point of view. Jeannie, how about you?
Oh my gosh, my mother was a good cook, but she was very plain, kind of a farm cook, right? She was used to cooking for a crew of farm workers, right? So, and she also grew up during the Depression, so meat had to be cooked until it was dead. It bounced on the plate, right?
And curled up.
Yes, and curled up at the edges in fright. Best mashed potatoes on God's green earth, best fried chicken on God's green earth. I mean, awesome about some things, but that woman could bake. Oh, she won prizes at the fair and things like that. But she was an absolute horrible teacher. Neither my sister nor I learned to cook, thankfully, or bake from her. But she was a super inspiration because, man, the plates of cookies, like you're talking about, Gail, where there's just, all the different varieties, and the pecan cookies and the pinwheels and the chocolate chip cookies and the, all these little special, 7-layer bars and fudge. She would always make fudge at Christmas, and she'd make a whole batch of fudge without nuts and a whole batch of fudge with nuts, because the family was perfectly split down the middle as to who liked what. So my sister and I basically on our own learned how to bake and cook ourselves, because she just couldn't teach us. And also we had started to, eat with friends at friends' houses and things. And, I think I was probably 20 before I learned that pork chops weren't supposed to bounce on the plate. And that they could be juicy, and they could be sort of just slightly, ever so slightly pink in the middle, just a little bit. My my father just about died the first time I ever ordered a medium rare steak in his presence. He thought I was going to be ill. But so when I got out, when I went to college, my sister got me a subscription to Bon Appetit magazine. Because she was already out in the world. She's older than me. So she had already sort of learned some of these lessons. And we used to laugh. I mean, just be on the phone and just howl with laughter about the things that we had tried to bake and not succeeded with. But every holiday season, Bon Appetit would have, usually in the November issue, October-November issues, they would have cookie recipes because you were coming into the holiday season, and some would be for Hanukkah and some would be for Kwanzaa and some would be for, so all different holidays. And I had so much fun trying out all that stuff because there was not a lot of that in North Carolina. So it was really cool to learn all those different things. So she was our inspiration because she could make it happen. And she has y'all were talking about sugar cookies, and Dawn, you were saying that ixnay on the sugar cookies, but I have a recipe of hers that has a little bit of grated orange peel in it, and it makes the cookies taste so good, and they're just ever so slightly. And I tried it. Was you're saying a page that you could experiment. I realized that I could, so I tried lime and I tried lemon. I tried all sorts of stuff in it. And I still have her very battered cookbook, handwritten cookbook in fountain pen with her beautiful cursive writing with all the recipes. Now it does include some of those fads you were also talking about where there's Jell-O surprise in there.
Gotta have the Jell-O surprise.
Yeah. Wow. It jiggles. Woo. But yeah, she was our inspiration, and she was, I still miss some of those cookies that she used to make that I have the recipe for, but it's the kind of thing where you already know your kids won't eat them. So but the one we all dreaded were pecan sandies because they tasted like sand.
Oh.
And she loved them dipped in coffee, and none of us drank coffee at the time. And it was like, could we have some more chocolate chip? But my favorites, I mentioned the nostalgic ones earlier, but one of my favorites that I still make, so it's both nostalgic and practical, are the molasses cookies. Somebody else had mentioned.
All right. Dee.
So I can't remember when I couldn't bake. It was something my mother and grandmother passed down to me early, and I got to watch them do it again with my daughter as soon as she could stand on a step stool. And I can remember clearly standing on the step stool and peering over the counter, being very, very hands-on with baking cookies at Christmas time. And it was I call it now, sacred knowledge for my family, that, these are the special recipes that we cook at this special time of the year. And the special wooden recipe box came out on the counter with the special worn recipe cards, and they use the same ingredients every year. And it was very, in a way, ritualistic, and just the whole atmosphere of doing that is so nostalgic for me. But it was amazing to watch my daughter get initiated in the same cooking practices when she could barely peer over the edge of the counter too. When we visit my mom this weekend, I'm very much looking forward to all the three of us being in the kitchen and having that generational cooking experience, because I was lucky. My mother and grandmother were excellent cooking teachers. Otherwise, I don't think I ever would have learned, because I really had zero interest except during those special times of the year. And that's what sucked me in.
Okay. Jessica.
My mother is a wonderful baker and a good cook and a terrible teacher. God bless her. She is the queen of her kitchen, and God help if you enter her domain. I love her to pieces, but this is the way it is. And so I learned some things by just watching, because I did watch when I wasn't rushed out of the kitchen. But I really started learning once I got, out on my own. And then I started experimenting. And started, I watch a lot of cooking television. It's kind of sad how much I watch. And I just try things. And she's always baked a lot. She bakes bread, she bakes cake, cookies. And we have traditions at Christmas too, beyond cookies. We have a family fruit cake. And that's something where everybody is allowed to come in and everybody does get together and make fruit. There is the making of the fruit cake, which is a wonderful memory and flavor and just all of that. But I started baking primarily because I was fascinated with it and I kind of wanted to figure out if I could do what she did. And so it started out with like baking cake, and then, hey, I can bake cookies too. And bread came later. It came maybe finally about 7 or 8 years ago. I'd been afraid to bake bread. I'd tried in my 20s and failed miserably and couldn't figure out. And I thought I just wasn't good at bread. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I tried again and discovered that I actually was pretty good at it. And I have the patience for it. So I have time for it. If I have time for it, I plan a whole day and bake bread. And it's a joyful kind of thing. It makes the house smell good. It's relaxing. And I end up with a product that I can make toast with and enjoy for several days and share with people. So, and I'm constantly learning more stuff as I watch like Bake Off, or I'll catch Mary Berry talking about, she's my patron saint. Honest
She's
to
awesome.
Oh, yeah.
she is amazing. She taught me how to make the perfect pound cake. I'm still just blown away by this. So she was teaching technique on one show, and I'm like, okay, I've never made a cake this way. I'm going to try this. So I made a cinnamon pound cake for a friend, and I tried her flour technique of adding a little at a time, a little. It was perfect. It was floating off the plate. I still don't understand this magic, but it was the most perfect pound cake I've ever eaten. And I don't know that I could replicate it. So I'm just like, I will listen to this old British lady tell me things, and I will do what she tells me to do because I know she knows what the heck she's doing. So yeah, I can't remember a time when baked goods were not a part of my life.
Yeah.
It just is what it is.
Okay. Paige, we started with you, right? I think on this one. Okay. I think the most ambitious cookie I ever tried to make was out of the Nancy Drew cookbook, and it was for baklava. Now, I had somehow gotten baklava somewhere and decided that I really liked it, and so I was going to try. The only problem was that phyllo dough was apparently too exotic for the Nancy Drew cookbook. So it suggested that we substitute corn tortillas.
Oh no.
Oh, Lord.
Hell.
No.
8-layer stack of honey-soaked corn tortillas. And
Oh my God.
it tasted absolutely nothing like anything that has ever happened.
That's heinous.
Somebody
So-
needs to be horsewhipped.
Not an appropriate substitute.
Garlic and crucifixes here. I really.
No.
I am fairly certain that's a hanging offense.
The other thing to your royal icing bloodbath, Jessica, we decided the kids, when they were teenagers at this point, wanted to ice cookies. And so we made sugar cookies, and Larry made, royal icing. And this is where personality comes in, because 3 people in the family have tremendous art ability. And so Larry and the girls were being painstaking, and these were going to be masterpieces, and they could have gone in the Louvre when they were done, and they were just being so. And our son decided to be chaotic evil and see if he could just make them as ugly as possible because he would compete.
Because he could.
Because he was 14. That's what you do. And then there's me just trying for a snowman and failing miserably. So yeah, we finally gave that one up. Well, folks, we have blown through our time. I think we could talk all night long and it would be wonderful and I would still be very hungry. But let's let everybody say where we can find you online. And if you have a new, recent, or upcoming book, tell us about that too. Dawn?
So you can find me online at dsdeal.com. It's going to look like to hell, and because that's apparently the way you say it in German, but it's spelled DEHEL, and there are links to everything there. That's the easiest way to find me.
All right, Jean Marie.
Okay, I can be found at jeanmarieward.com, and my links to the social media that I'm most frequently on are there. I haven't yet got up any Mastodon yet, but I'm working on it. So, but it'll all be there. My most recent release is possibly the worst published short story I've ever written, called Juana's Rock in the Eye of Argon, The Further Adventures of Brigner the Barbarian, available wherever online books can be found.
Okay, Jeannie.
I'm sorry. That's just a good one, Jean Marie. I'm Jeanne Adams. You can find me at jeanneadams.com, and you can find me here on ConTinual a whole heck of a lot. And you can find me on most social media. But like Jean Marie, you can find my links to social media on my website. And I will be in Valentine's at Canham Castle in February. That's my upcoming one.
All right, Dee.
Let's see, my website is blackcandlecottage.com, and I'm also at Black Candle Cottage on Instagram, where I do most of my posting. My most recent nonfiction book is Burn a Black Candle, an Italian Northern Grimoire, which talks about a lot of the information that my mother and grandmother passed on to me growing up. And then my most recent fiction book under D.L. Solito is a short story called The Crawl, which is a cyberpunk story that is in the Deadly Enhancements anthology.
Very good. Paige.
Oh, yeah, I'm Paige L. Christie. Everywhere you got to put the L in because I have two first names. My latest full novel finished off my series. Yay, finally, in October. The series is The Voice of Arnon. The last book is Stormforge. I've got a short coming out in the newest Mercedes Lackey anthology, which comes out this month, The Shenanigans. So that's the latest thing I've got upcoming. And I've got a short coming out in the JordanCon anthology. It will be released at JordanCon for charity in April. And I think that will be the next place that people can find me in person, would be at JordanCon in Atlanta in April. Otherwise, you can track me down online, Paige L. Christie, everywhere.
Very good. And Jessica.
You can find me at jessicanettlesauthor.com. I'm on all the social medias, including Mastodon, and that's not reflected on my website yet, but it will be. My next short story should be in an anthology called Lonely Hollows, along with Daryl Z. Grizzle and a few other folks that you may know. I'm hoping to be at Atlanta Steampunk Expo in February. I still have to line up a few things to make that happen. But yeah, and hopefully I'll be around on here some more too.
Awesome. Well, I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As long as you spell those, you can find me everywhere. Both names are .com, and you'll get to my website. The newest books are Spell, Salt, and Steel Season 2, Charon, which is the second book in the Night Vigil, and on pre-order at the end of December, coming at the end of December, is Spellbound, which is the fourth book in the Joe Max series. But most of the time, you can find me here on ConTinual. So thank you all so much for a wonderful panel on cookies, and thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more holiday good stuff here on ConTinual, so we'll see you online.